The 24 landscapes, I first made and showed this work in 2001. I was thinking about Marilyn Monroe as an art historical figure through Warhol and through Richard Hamilton. These images don't come from the internet. They're coming through scouring books and fan photo stores, thinking about what's in the archive. So I just like the idea that in some ways, these images that are taken from throughout Marilyn Monroe's career as an actor constituted a kind of archive. I was literally just learning Photoshop myself, so nothing special about the operation. It was just using the clone tool and removing Marilyn from the image. I was specifically looking for shots of Marilyn Monroe on the beach, and specifically shots in which you would see across the ocean to an ocean horizon. My intuition was to do with the ocean horizon represents, perceptually speaking, this kind of infinity point around which one-point perspective is organized, and maybe just even diagrammatic or a kind of conceptual idea of how the infinity point is at the opposite end of a viewer's user interface looking at the picture. So there's, in a way, like a psychological dynamic connected to this kind of mundane landscape that exists in the background that would go unnoticed because, you know, the focus is on Marilyn. Once you know that they are images of Marilyn Monroe, you know they're haunted, you feel the emptiness, and you feel a kind of like ghostly presence. In retrospect, realize that there's a tradition that has to do with landscape painting, that has to do with continual erasure of, let's say, indigenous habitation in order to make space available for occupation, that to me these images now speak to. So this relationship between foreground and background that in a way starts out with 24 landscapes, carries over for 25 years of exploration. This very simple operation of using Photoshop and the clone tool and a kind of compositing of layers, finding pieces of the background to cover over the figure in the foreground, generally relates to an interest in the relationship between foreground and background that I've also explored in a lot of videos, and in particular, the series called Caryatid. But starting with a triptych, The Long Count, 3 fights of Muhammad Ali in which Muhammad Ali and his opponent are seemingly erased from the ring to shift focus to the audience watching the boxing ring, and which is now empty, save for kind of ghosts that are the residue of the editing process. And what's interesting to me about that is, as an editor in an editing suite, working on a video, intending an operation like the partial or full erasure of foreground objects, you're playing with these layers of an image in a very focused and technically minute way, so that in a way you become attuned to the mutually constituting nature of the elements in the photograph or the video, so much so that in a way, as an editor, you're constantly like absorbed within the equal weight that the positive element and the negative element, or the foreground and the background elements, carry in the image. There's an opportunity in the art exhibition space to reproduce the space of the editing room as a mode of display in a way that you can't do in a theatrical release. There's only ever one screen, whereas in the editing room, there's always at least 2 screens. You have the compositing screen and you have the source screen where you see like one layer at a time, and there's an intrinsic kind of need, an arrangement to allow for this kind of multiple view to occur while you're editing. Because I started out engaging these tools at a point where they were just emerging and where there was a lot of interest in the novelty of digital media in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was a conscious strategy to play with titles coming from ancient texts, the Old Testament, for example, or from the history of painting. I'm very interested in how these things that we access now under the rubric of technological innovation relate to maybe dynamics that, for lack of better frameworks at the time, would have been considered religious or spiritual explorations in the past. So we're standing in front of sculptural fragments that are part of an ongoing series called Incarnator, and resulted from an invitation to join a residency in the Philippines in 2017 at a place called Bellas Artes. I had this opportunity to work with wood carvers in the Philippines, and the more I got into it, I realized that the history of wood carving or sculpture in the Philippine context, going back 500 years, is associated with religious image making, specifically Catholic, because of Spain's involvement in the Philippines starting in the 1500s. In particular, I sought out wood carver named Willie Layog, one of the premier religious image makers in the Philippines, and asked him if he was willing to do a collaboration to apply all of his techniques to create an image that is as close as possible to the production of a crucifixion, which he's done many, many times, with the one alteration of including a portrait of Justin Bieber, his face and his body tattoos. In a way, just thinking of him as a kind of contemporary embodiment of image-making practices that go back centuries. These are really like power images. Those that can afford it will actually commission religious images from sculptors in Seville, imported to Manila. And so I sought out one of the more well-known sculptors in Seville, a guy named Jose Antonio Navarro Arteaga, and commissioned him to do a counterpart portrait of Justin Bieber. So I was thinking about this tradition of religious image making as a kind of craft tradition that carries the DNA of this historic trade route. What you're seeing is the body in pieces, the way that they're fabricated. Each joint has a kind of beautiful wooden joint system. The body parts are produced separately for ease of transport, and I like purposefully showing these images dismembered. To me, it serves to keep the emphasis on the production process rather than on the more seamless product that would usually be the end point. In the collaboration with religious image makers, something emerged that I didn't expect. What I found is that to commission an image from a santero or like a encarnador who makes religious images always entails the reproduction of an existing template. Every studio that creates religious images has three-dimensional template forms: a crucifix, a Virgin Mary, a baby Jesus. These are all forms that are kept as a fundamental part, like an archive of the carving studio. And the first step in the process is that the template form is put on a machine that basically duplicates it. In a sense, there's like a similar kind of indexical process of reproduction in sculpture as there is in any lens-based medium, photography or filmmaking. My entry point into sculpture is through 3D printing. The earliest kind of sculptural pieces in this show were made about the same time as 24 Landscapes, with the title Poltergeist, a spoon and a fork that are 3D printed objects. And I would say, in particular with sculpture and in the relationship to 3D scanning and printing, there's just an interest in how kind of inherited categories of things now exist in ways that scramble certain assumptions. The line between a kind of organic form and a digital form, that boundary becomes porous to me. If you absorb the language of production, it kind of seeps into an understanding of what a living form is. The idea that you can kind of break apart and reconstitute things is analogous to research that is ongoing on the level of DNA code, for example. The first time I came into the Geffen space, there were no walls in the space. It was completely wide open. They were just demolishing walls from the previous show. There was a sense of it as like a kind of a construction site with temporary structures being built and collapsed within it. The idea of treating it like a soundstage came up right away. And thinking about LA as a kind of post-production city, a city where all kinds of image production and object production are primary phenomena and industry in this city. I'm really just, in a way, trying to build off of a kind of popular understanding of post-production to describe something that, in my opinion, is much bigger, a kind of current perceptual regime we're in that we're not always aware of because we take it as natural. It is the water we're swimming in or the air we're breathing, but in some ways it's invisible because of it. I think of post-production, this process of composition of an image or a soundtrack, becoming more and more familiar via the kind of editing suites that we carry around on our iPhones or Androids, and made easier and easier every day. Now, with algorithms added to the mix, to me, this is almost like an interesting metaphor for something bigger that is not just taking place in Photoshop with an image or in After Effects with a video, but because these have become like almost daily operations via social media, it's a convenient way to describe something that I think has bigger implications in terms of a kind of psychological makeup and even a societal makeup, in the sense that the same dynamics of editing apply to storytelling and the realm of public memory as well as private memory. I mean, in some ways, to me, memory exists as a kind of archive of images, so that overlap between a technical process of literal image editing and a kind of more embodied psychological or physiological process of remembering or forgetting could serve as a kind of way into an exploration of something much more difficult to grasp, almost like an ontology, the limits of imagination.